It's a board where the imposition has the nut advantage. The board ran out quite clean. Usually if you have a nut advantage and you come to the river, some percentage of the time, some hands would want to get their stack in to apply maximum pressure. Because I mean, this is 866, so 86 big blinds in a pot of 27 big blinds, which is quite a big ass bet. The guy is definitely not afraid to put his money in, but then again, it's a computer, it doesn't know any fear. What's up YouTube? Welcome to another video here on the Poker Ambition channel. Today we're going to be talking about the solver versus practice. What I mean with that is, what does the solver do and does this apply in practice? Now there's many players who might not use a solver, and arguments that I often hear is that yes, what the solver does is too complicated, I don't know how to use it, or yeah, what the solver does doesn't apply in my games because they play crazy, they don't play GTO, which are all valid arguments and are true, but shouldn't be used as an argument not to use a solver at all. So today I'm gonna try to show you how you can still use a solver to exploit your population that you're playing in. And I'm gonna do that by using a bluff catching example. So the situation we're going to look at today is a big blind versus button scenario. We are here, hero, and he is there, the villain. The villain opened the button to 2.5x, as we can see here on the left top of the screen. We check, he c-bets 1/3, we call, turn we check, and now it's up to villain. So 2 8s, 9 5 4 queen. Let's see what imposition is supposed to do from a solver perspective. So this is what the imposition's turn c-betting strategy would look like in theory. I've only given it an option to bet pot on the turn for this example, but I think actually this already touches on an important topic. Let's say, for example, you are looking at the solver from a perspective, okay, what should I do as imposition here on the turn? And you've only given it a pot option. It will show you the correct solution when only being allowed to bet pot. But maybe the solver doesn't want to bet pot, maybe he wants to bet 3/4, maybe he wants to bet 150%. But if we don't give him that option, we will never know. But for argument's sake, we will stick with the pot scenario. So if our opponent is only allowed to bet pot, which I think in practice people sometimes overbet, sometimes bet 3/4, that's why I kind of ended up picking pot. And we look at the hand choice, we always see solvers being quite randomizing. You know, he doesn't really pick hands at 100% frequency, except for kings and aces, because the EV of betting is quite clear, better than checking. With all other hands, when you see a mix, that means that in theory, at least, the EVs run quite close. So it doesn't really matter. It does in practice, but not in theory. And it's kind of also to mix it up and have various hands in various lines. The hands that I want to quickly focus on, if you look at turn c-betting, is that if you look at a hand like 10-8, for example, 7-8, 6-7, ace-deuce, ace-3s, which are all the draws. This board does contain quite a lot of draws. That's also the reason why I chose this board as an example, because we can see here that the solver is quite balanced, you could say, with his draws. He doesn't bet him as high as a frequency as you would maybe do yourself. So for example, if I look at this scenario and if I have 6-7 or 7-8 or maybe end like ace-3, I see like, okay, I have an over, a gutter, high card on the turn, you know, it's quite a good card for me. I will decide to barrel. I won't find the 20% turn c-betting strategy with 7-8, to be honest. So if you would, then, you know, GG, I wouldn't. But this is the turn c-betting strategy in position in theory. Let's look at what we should do. Basically, against this strategy, we should be folding around 53% of the time. And we have pocket eights, he bets pot. We see that pocket eights is a clear fold, which makes quite a lot of sense. I mean, if his bluffs mainly come from a lot of 8x, like jack 8, 10-8, 7-8. So yeah, we usually, when you want to pick a hand to continue versus barrel, we don't really want to have a hand that blocks his bluffs. And also 8s has quite poor improvability compared to a hand like 5-6, for example, has more outs than a hand like pocket eights. 5-6 also blocks like some value bets like 5s or queen 5 suited, 4-5 suited, etc. So 5-6 would be clearly a better call than pocket eights. So if this is where we stop our studying or analyzing of this spot, if we wanted to know what should we do with pocket eights, we now have the answer. We fold and we've played the hand correctly. If that would be the case, this would be a very short YouTube video, and I think we would have a lot of disappointed viewers. So we're not gonna stop right there. What we're going to do is we're gonna compare the GTO imposition strategy with what population is doing. So here we see a board. The board is 9 high or lower, and we can see turn C betting strategies of your average mid-6 population. This applies for cash, MTTs, it's all the same. And we can see a trend that on a high card turn, barrel frequencies go up, and on a low card turn, barrel frequencies go down. This I don't think comes as a surprise. Also think, like I said, how would you approach a spot? Well, I would barrel it at a quite a high frequency, which also shows in the data. So we have a 61.4 on average. We do see that on EP, MP and the cutoff. Barrel frequency a bit higher on the bottom, but still we're close to 60, and GTO here is at 54. So we can make the argument that on this exact board, with all the draws being present and a high card on the turn C betting strategy is gonna definitely reach 60 and probably even go over it. So the next step would be to tell the solver that we're not facing this strategy, but we're facing this strategy. The response that we have as big blind is always dependent on the strategy that, in this case, the imposition button is using. We're responding to a strategy. So if we go from 54 to, let's say, 62, I've always made him see bet the turn with hands like King Jack, hands like 6-7 if he had it. When you see it's partly black, it means we don't have this hand all the time. Could be that we checked the flop, could be that we didn't open pre-flop 100% of the time. But mainly I focused on letting him bet draws more often. I've also made him always bet king queen. I saw that in theory it sometimes checks, but I think most people will always barrel. So then we reach around a 62% barrel frequency. Then if we compare the response that we had in theory, which was to fold 53%, with the response that we should have in practice, so versus the population, we can clearly see we should not be folding 53% because in position is barreling more often than he should. Therefore, we should fold less often than we should. If we then look at pocket eights, we can see it's still folding some of the time. The eights that are usually continuing are the eights with a heart. Didn't give us an 8 of hearts on purpose because else the example I think would be a bit too obvious. I want to take it to the extremes. Eights with a diamond and a spade was folding around 60% of the time from the top of my head. And that is because when you have a heart, basically if he barrels hearts, he has less equity because we already have a heart. And also if we improve to a set on the river, which is very unlikely, but if we have a heart, it will always be an 8 that doesn't improve villain to a flush. So basically our outs are cleaner. And we can clearly see that hands like, for example, 5-6 was a frequency call. Now it's always a call. Even a hand like, let me see, King 5, King 4, now suddenly become calls, whereas in theory it would be a fold. So this is clearly a situation where indeed practice plays different than theory. So yes, we should also respond different than theory. Okay. So we called, stubborn as we are, we didn't go for the 60% folding frequency because can't win if you fold. Don't take this advice too literally. So the river is an ace, brings in another scare card, and we're gonna check to villain. Not really a reason to dunk bet here on the river. So let's see what villain should do in theory. Villain in theory, again, you know, in this case I gave it 4 sizings in theory. It has the 3/4, which it prefers at the highest frequency, and it also has some all-ins. It's a board where the imposition has the nut advantage. The board ran out quite clean. Usually if you have a nut advantage and you come to the river, some percentage of the time, some hands would want to get their stack in to apply maximum pressure. Because I mean, this is 866, so 86 big blinds in a pot of 27 big blinds, which is quite a big ass bet. The guy is definitely not afraid to put his money in, but then again, it's a computer, it doesn't know any fear. So checks around 49%, so we have roughly a 50% betting frequency here in theory. If we then look at our response, pocket eights, clearly a fold. So again, if we would end the video here, it wouldn't be as exciting as, you know, like I said, you cannot win if you fold. So let's see if we can maybe squeeze out a call. But yeah, clearly again, eights, for the same reasons we wanted to fold on the turn, we should fold on the river. But now the question is this strategy represent for your population? Let's take a quick look. 7-8 again is checking some of the time. King 8 is checking a high frequency. Actually, all King X are checking. King Jack, King 10, King 8, King 7. Whereas again, put yourself in our shoes. Let's say we are villains, so we have opened the button, we see bet at the flop, barrel the turn, and now the river comes the ace. What are you gonna do with your 7-8? Are you gonna check and lose the pot, or are you gonna bet and try to win the pot? Let's be honest here. I'm gonna join the club of I would probably bet and try to win the pot. Which, like I said, in theory doesn't necessarily happen. That's quite a lot of give ups. If we look again at what population is doing, we can kind of see the same trend as on the turn. When a high card comes on the river, compared to a low card, barrel frequencies go up. Like I said, this is quite natural. I think it shouldn't be a surprise that we see this. Here on the ace river, this is the exact texture: low board, high turn, high river. We can see a 64% betting frequency. Well, theory, as we just showed, only had a 50% betting frequency. So then, of course, we've again concluded like, hey, in practice, something is happening that's different than in theory. So we shouldn't follow theory and we should use our brains, I guess. What would you do if someone is barreling more often than he should? We should fold less often. It's as simple as that. So if we take the strategy, for argument's sake, again, I've only used a 3/4 strategy and it went up from, what was it, a 50% check. I added 10% bets and mainly focused on never checking 7-8. Still actually checking quite a lot of King Jack, King 10. Like I said, up to you if you think this is relevant for your population or for the villain you're playing against. But it's maybe interesting for now for you to think like, okay, he's barreling more. He already barreled more on the turn. He's now barreling more on the river. What's your response? Pause the video for a second and think about like, okay, how will I respond? Okay. No, most people are going to be impatient, and I never stop videos at this point, gonna be honest with you. But let's see, spoiler alert, if you did want to think about it, what we should do. Theory, 46% folds. Practice, 4% folds. Okay, so basically we never fold. If we now look at pocket eights, which was clearly fold, it's now clearly a call. But then again, everything becomes a call. And this is something that happens in practice quite often. Things aren't necessarily as close in practice as they are in theory, so also adjustments or plays become more of 100% and zero frequency than in theory. Also, if you would look at, for example, we stick with the eights because it's literally like the worst possible bluff catcher. But then again, I mean, he's betting 3/4 of the time, 3/4 of the pot, sorry. So we need to be right around 30%. So if we take a look at pocket eights is going to be good around 35.5% versus that betting range. But even a hand like King Jack, for example, which is only king high, it's going to be good 36%. Basically, there is no hand, except for he did have some folds, which is 6-7. Okay, 6-7 doesn't even beat 7-8, so Yeah, we should probably fold 6-7. But if you're approaching this spot from a perspective of, okay, yeah, 8s, I'm always folding because it's a bad bluff catcher, then you're clearly missing the point here. Because yes, what is the best bluff catcher here? Yes, Queen 3, you know, not blocking any bluffs, maybe blocking a straight for the 3 deuce suited. I don't think I gave it 3 deuce suited on the button anyway. But I mean, it's blocking some value and it's not blocking bluffs. So from a blocker perspective, this is definitely a better call. And in theory, having 2.5% more equity versus a balanced range is gonna make a huge difference. But to come to a main conclusion, in theory, okay, blockers are gonna be the difference between a call being plus EV or minus EV. That is because, you know, the solver is more balanced and equities are quite close, EVs are quite close. So as you can see, the 2.5% that Queen 3 suited have more than a hand like Queen 10 or Queen Jack is definitely going to matter, and it's going to be the difference between calling and folding. However, as we saw in practice, it's going to only make the difference between a plus EV call being a bit more plus EV and a minus EV call being a bit less minus EV. All right, because as you saw, the adjustments should be huge. All right, so to just quickly sum it up here at the end, 3 main takeaways that I would get from this video, I've already selected it for you guys, is be very careful copying river, actually it says river decision, but in general, be very careful copying decisions from a solver. For you people who said like, yeah, but what the solver is doing isn't applicable for my games, you are indeed right. But don't let it stop you from using a solver, all right? For the people who've only been copying solvers, they basically would have already stopped evaluating the hand at the turn when we have folded 8s because the solver set that we had to fold. Look at the imposition, always look at the strategy that your opponent is using and see if that correlates with GTO, because only then GTO applies. Which brings us to point 2. We have to think less, so this is for the more GTO copying players. Think less about how your range should play or how your range should respond in theory. And this is quite obvious, for me at least. Think more about what your opponent has. That's also why I added the smiley face. I would say that poker is being made maybe a bit too complicated. It's kind of the curse of the modern day poker industry with the solvers, and we want to play GTO and correct, etc. In the end, it's quite simple. Figure out what your opponent has and then figure out if your hand has enough equity to call. Point number 3, things are often not close in practice, so blockers matter less. I think this should be a very important takeaway. If you are in a situation, estimate if the situation is close. If it is close, then by all means do take blockers in consideration very highly. If the situation you think is less close because villain is clearly over bluffing or under bluffing or due to the texture, the formation, whatever, make a read based on that and, you know, let go of blockers for a little bit. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure, if you enjoyed, to give it a thumbs up. If you thought this video sucked, give it a thumbs down. If you have any questions or any suggestions about future videos, leave them in the comments down below. Make sure to subscribe because there will be more videos coming up very soon. I wish you guys a lot of fun bluff catching. Small disclaimer here at the end, Poker Ambition cannot be held responsible for any money lost making 100% bluff catches in certain situations. But other than that, have fun and good luck at the tables.